Mr. Leong Mun Wai, please, if you can make your reply on the motion.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank the ministers and members for their participation until so late tonight. Rest assured, I'm time limited, so I only have 40 minutes for my speech. I come to this House to respond to a challenge by Minister Shanmugam to debate on SECA. It has been puzzling me because it was in reference to his remarks made on a racial incident, which has nothing to do with SECA. The very fact that he linked the incident to SECA was both disingenuous and troubling. The Prime Minister also, in his National Day rally speech, claimed that those who question SECA, wanting to put Singaporeans first, had a strong racial undertone. Minister Wong also reiterated many of those accusations throughout his speech, his two speeches today. But when I asked Minister Shanmugam for instances where I've commented about SECA prior to accepting his challenge, he can't reply me. He went on to ask me a few other questions, but he didn't reply me. So these are clearly attempts by this government to put a label on those seeking more information disclosure and more objective discussion on SECA as racist and xenophobic. I think I'll leave that issue as it is. We have done all our explanation that we are not racist or xenophobic. At the end of the day, justice is in the heart of the people. The people will decide. Political labels are convenient to use to discredit someone, but they are not helpful for an open and objective discussion. By the way, I have also to object to Minister Tan See Leng words just now saying that PSP is attacking foreigners. Maybe it's a slip of his tongue, but I have to correct that. All of us here today have one common objective, and that is to improve the job prospects and livelihood of Singaporeans. And I've stayed focused on that objective. So let me reiterate that we are neither racist nor xenophobic, and this debate is squarely about jobs and livelihoods of our PMETs, who are adversely affected by the foreign talent policy. The provisions on people movement in FTAs like SECA are only a small part of a much larger problem. To be clear, we need foreign talent. They play an important role in complementing, transferring skill and knowledge, as well as providing opportunities for cross-fertilization of ideas. But those that are brought in en masse under the EP and SP schemes are not, by definition, really foreign talent. They are foreign professionals let in without quota, resulting in displacement of our own workforce. By drawing on Mr. Goh Chok Tong's definition of mediocrity, a foreign talent should be one who earns more than $500,000 a year or $40,000 a month. While we do need foreign talent, more importantly, we need to protect our Singaporean core. And what is the Singaporean core? It is simply our citizens, natural or new, who recite our Singapore Pledge and whose interest the government has the prime responsibility to look after. The current policies have seriously hollowed out our core. In many key industries, our PMET core is no longer the dominant force that we can rely on for long-term growth. The very people that can ensure the future of our country are being displaced and hollowed out. It has been a long debate, and we have covered a lot of ground. However, as expected, the government's stance on the causes and the severity of the problem we are facing, or the Singaporeans are facing, is very different from ours. As a result, probably the new policies that the government is going to come out with will not solve the problems thoroughly, and Singaporean sufferings may have to go on. We might have to come back 1 year later again and debate on the same problem. Singaporeans would note that PSP has done our best to convince this government. Let me go through the differences between the government position and PSP position. First, the government says displacement due to globalized and fast-changing world. PSP say a large part is due to work pass holders. 2, the displacement problem is not serious, the government says. PSP says probably a lot more serious. Coming back to the 380,000 PME jobs the Manpower Minister had presented to us in the July 6 ministerial statement, we are trying to ask him, are you sure that this number represents a net job creation for Singaporeans? So there were some exchanges just now with my colleague Hazel Phua as well. There was no conclusion. But let me just share some numbers with you. 380,000 PME jobs created for locals, and that is for both Singaporeans and PRs. From 2005 to 2020. But during the same period, 600,000 PRs has been awarded to work pass holders. So the reclassification is likely to be a significant factor. But we don't know what is the number because we don't have the number from the government. On top of that, there were 400,000 university and polytechnic graduates during that period. So 1 million people seeking job versus 380,000 jobs created. So I don't know how to reconcile the numbers, but maybe in other future forums, we can continue to discuss that. Number 3, government say emphasis is on training and retraining Singaporeans. PSP say better prevent job displacement first. Let the foreigners do the skills transfer. Because once a person is displaced, it's difficult for him to find a new job. It is so easy to say, train again, take up the challenge and all that. The examples you quote, I'm sure, is a small minority of those Singaporeans who can really change to a new industry and learn new skills. Number 4, government say discrimination is sporadic. PSP say probably is structural. We have to look at it. Because the foreign work pass holders has been in Singapore in large numbers for the last 20 years. And they are a very influential force in the job market. So if you want to rectify the discriminative situation in the job market, that legislation may be too slow. Number 5, foreign talent create jobs, say the government. But PSP say the work pass holders we are attracting are all average work pass holders. where do they have the ability to create jobs? So they are just here to share our jobs. So the jobs done by them, most of it can be done by Singaporeans as well. So in that sense, Professor Hun's lump of labor fallacy may not apply. Number 6. And member Mr. Patrick Tay also mentioned this, that there's a lot of resistance from employers if we want to change the foreigners' policy. Of course, that's expected, because after all, they are profit seekers. But PSP say, how long can we kick the can down the road? At some point, we have to change. And this is a golden opportunity, because now we can tell the employers, work harder. We can give you the quota now, but make sure you promise to scale down your people in 3 years' time. This is the opportunity to convince the employers to work together and we change the course of our economy. If not, our economy will continue to be stuck in a low value add position. Lastly, government say you send wrong signal to foreigners. PSP say, as long as we Singaporeans are united, government and alternative parties all united and say we have to change course, I don't think foreigners can say much. Because that is the way we have chosen. And I don't think the foreigners are here just because we give them work passes. They are here to make a business decision and a strategy. There are many factors involved. Work passes are just one of the factors. And in fact, afterwards I will elaborate on our policy recommendations. We are not saying that you don't allow the foreign companies to come in with the number of work passes they want initially, but it must be transitional. There must be localization over time. We cannot allow them to continue to keep the same number of foreigners from the very day they come in. So as long as we are united, I think we can put the message nicely to the foreigners. After all, we can set up a fair consideration framework for foreigners. Why should a fair consideration framework for Singaporeans? That is something, as a Singaporean, I feel very puzzled. An interesting point was brought up by Ms. Janet Ang. I respect Janet as a senior executive in the private sector. She mentioned that Singaporeans didn't have the relevant skills, work knowledge, and global experience. But I would like to say, if Singaporeans continue to be uprooted from their jobs, where do we get the opportunity to accumulate the skills and know-how over time? Like I said just now, you cannot expect the Singaporeans to pick up new skills all the time. Are you going to say that if foreigners come in and replace the Singaporeans because it's low cost, the Singaporeans lost a job and then he has to go and acquire a new skill again? No. Skills and know-how, and that comes to our capabilities of our economy. The whole foreign talent policy, as far as we can see up to now, contribute little to our capability building. Partly because our Singaporean core is being affected. Our Singaporean core are no longer learning over time in the same job. They'll be displaced. Another thing I want to point out to Janet is that we hope the top managers in Singapore would also understand that and support the Singaporeans and not keep saying Singaporeans don't have this, don't have that, because they are now under a system that do not have the incentives to make them work hard, to make them work in the way we want them to take up the challenge and all that. Okay, those prospects existed in our generation, Janet. In this generation, it's more challenging. And now, the leadership of the country has brought in an additional trouble for them, and that is competition. Not that we want to avoid competition, but as I've said before in my speech, the competition was not really fair to start with. So other than the discriminatory structure that we talk about in the job market, actually our economy now is also in a very different operating structure, thanks to the 20 years of foreign talent policy. It will not be easy to transform. We know that. Like a GLC senior manager who is a friend, a very close friend, recently shared with me, if you want me to overhaul my whole system now, it will be very high cost because it's totally dependent on foreigners now. But I think we still have to make the change. If together we have a consensus, we can rope in a lot of initiatives, a lot of resources, we can give each other time, employers, workers, but I think we need to make the change. The next I want to comment about is from Mr. Satyandi, who mentioned that Singaporeans are now very active in the global financial markets. Well, I like to hear that, but I also like to remind him, we Singaporeans have been in the forefront of the financial markets since the 1980s. I started work in GIC in 1986. Before that, many of my seniors, not just in GIC, but seniors in the financial sector in Singapore, were pioneers in financial innovations in New York. They go to New York and they make the innovation. Some of the innovations were interest rate swaps and all the equity and bond derivatives. I'm not so capable, but I set up one of the first equity derivative desks in Tokyo in 1987. And Mr. Satyandi mentioned about my PR recommendation. I recommend to control the number, manage the number down. But he didn't read my recommendation correctly. I actually say the recommendation is for work pass holders. So I'm in support of Singaporeans with foreign spouses and give the PR to the foreign spouses. I'm in support of that. But for this recommendation, I'm referring to PR and citizenship to the work pass holders. So to reiterate PSP's position, 1, we think the foreign talent is not a silver bullet to solve all our problems. 2, the foreign talent policy is the root cause of the influx of foreigners, and that has caused a significant number of displacement of Singaporeans. 3, unfair wage competition is the main economic driver of the displacement. 4, decisive and concrete measures is now needed to rebalance our job market. 5, and lastly, the FTAs and SECA are part of the equation when we consider immigration and employment policies. And unless the government can provide new information to prove otherwise, unfortunately, as of today, we still cannot agree that SECA is net beneficial to Singapore. Next, I'd like to address the policy recommendations that I've made. In reply to Minister Lawrence Wong and also Minister Tan See Leng. First of all, PSP is for an open economy and society. So our policy recommendations are not meant to make Singapore a closed society or economy. And our policy recommendations are meant to make a point that all of us agree upon that we change course. We have to change course. But after we have agreed to that, I would think that we can throw in or rope in a lot of other things and provide the leeway for us to implement those policies. They need not be cast in stone. And among the policies that I've recommended, only the price-related policies, or I call price control policies, has got a time frame. For the quota policies, I have purposely make it no time constraint. I hope you notice that. Okay, in terms of the policy, firstly, I think we really need to eliminate the wage disadvantage against Singaporeans, hence the EP levy. I don't think Minister Tan See Leng twice attempt to reply to my EP levy as a necessity to equalize the compensation package of the work pass holders of the EP and Singaporean really answer the question. Because the 17% CPF, employer CPF contribution is a differential. It's a direct differential. You cannot avoid that. And being an employer, that will go into his decision making. B, in order to attract more foreign talent, the government also agreed that the qualifying salaries should go up. So it's just a matter of how fast. My policy may be a bit faster. C, I did not put any time limit to reduce the headcount of work pass holders. Although I would like, actually today, we can come to some conclusion as to what is the number of displaced Singaporeans. So that becomes a target that we can work on. But since the government claims there's very few displacement, then we will not discuss that anymore. But I didn't put any time limit to reducing the headcount. Okay, I also didn't put any time limit to reducing the single nationality number. Okay, but all this, there is an aspirational or planning target that maybe we should put a 10% cap on the single nationality and that. So what I'm trying to say is, the policies that PSP has recommended, actually we are very mindful of the effect and the implementation, the effect of the implementation has on the employment market, on the job market, and also directly what kind of, or indirectly, what kind of messages we are sending to foreigners. Next, we also have to reflect how the problems of the foreign talent policy has been allowed to fester, develop, and exist for the last 20 years. It tells us a lot about the checks and balances in our governance system. In particular, we have to question the freedom of information, tripartite partnership, and the conduct of our government. First, freedom of information. Throughout this long-running saga on the foreign talent policy, accurate data has been lacking, which has contributed to the large amount of fake news and speculation floating around. In my own experience of preparing for this debate, I cannot find the figures on intra-corporate transferees. Of course, today, Minister provided a few more years. But the thing is, why just give out piecemeal? You are the one who is generating the data. You should be putting the data in an organized format. Yes, we agree that some data may be sensitive, but please put it in an organized format for people to analyze. There are so many people in Singapore who will be able to analyze the data if the data are presented regularly and in an organized manner. Like today, Minister Tan See Leng provided, I would say, quite a lot of new data, but the new data are not actually available for us to analyze without him telling us. So the way the government is doing is what I call guerrilla data, Whenever they want to prove a point, they give you a few more data. You look at the chart that Minister Tan See Leng has given us, below put Labour Survey Report. That is available. After that, administrative data from the Research Department of MOM. So without the administrative data, we don't have the whole picture. Dr. Tan Cheng Bock has called for transparency, accountability, and independence in matters of national governance. Singaporeans have the right to information in order to make informed opinions and judgments. We urge the government to introduce the Freedom of Information Act as soon as possible. Although we are not the first one to raise this, Workers' Party has always been talking about this, and we thank them for that. The Parliament also has a constitutional role to play in ensuring that sufficient information is provided and policies are thoroughly debated. To this end, we recommend the setting up of Standing Parliamentary Select Committee in every ministry with representatives from both the ruling and alternative parties to improve information flow, to facilitate more substantial policy deliberation. And policy deliberation is about an integrated deliberation. It is not just a legal interpretation. It is more social economic analysis, but on top of that, philosophy, history, how human beings have behaved over history. Those are important things for policy making. The second point I want to make is tripartism. Tripartism has been practiced since independence. However, in my opinion, the weak NTUC link in the tripartite partnership has become obvious during the foreign talent policy saga. I believe Mr. Patrick Tay and all the NTUC leadership and the NTUC staff are working very hard. But if the overall policy is pointing at a different direction, the results that come out of their hard work speaks for themselves. Lowly paid workers constantly needing governmental financial support to get by, despite working full-time, PMETs in their 40s and 50s finding themselves extremely vulnerable to discrimination, and now underemployment. So NTUC needs a lot of soul searching if it still wants to be relevant in representing the interest of the Singaporean workers. We also urge Singaporean employers to stand up against discrimination. They will have the most to lose in the long run, in the long term, if the current situation leads to a radical change of our business culture and mode of operation without a robust Singaporean core. We urge employers to take the lead in rooting out discrimination in the job market so that we can build a competitive yet fair, multicultural and multinational workforce with Singaporeans at the core. Lastly, conduct of government. The government needs to show more empathy rather than lip service in order to understand the psychic and the real experiences of the working citizens. Many of them are struggling. Even if one Singaporean is being discriminated, we should take action. Let's not argue about majority, widespread or not widespread. Every Singaporean will have a duty to make sure he's not discriminated in the job market. Over the years, while Singaporeans have constantly provided feedback on the predicament, the government has insisted that all attempts in trying to curb immigration and foreign workforce growth in order to safeguard Singaporeans will end up hurting the Singaporeans themselves. I quote Dr. Amy Khor from her speech at the White Paper debate in February 2013. Quote, "To curb immigration or foreign workforce growth in order to safeguard Singaporeans could, in an ironic twist, hurt the very people this reversal is intended to help." Unquote. I wonder what Dr. Amy Khor has to say now. Before the ironic twist has happened, the silver bullet unleashed by the foreign talent policy had actually shot down many Singaporeans' livelihood and may hit Singapore soon. Well, time is a powerful weakness. When Singaporeans' anxiety has persisted for the last 10 to 20 years, I think it is difficult to justify that the current policy is not fraught. Honourable members of this House, contrary to the original promises presented in the Population White Paper, the foreign talent policy has created in Singapore an imbalanced population with a diluted national identity, an economy with inadequate technological innovation, and significant displacement of Singaporean workers. This has been a debate that many Singaporeans are concerned with and anxiously waiting for. This is not just a debate about a particular section of SECA, nor has it anything to do with racism and xenophobia. It is a debate about elevating the plight of our PMETs adversely affected by the foreign talent policy. It is a debate about the need to safeguard the Singaporean core, which is the pillar of our economy and our future. It is a debate about developing our very own talent by looking into new ideas to create opportunities for them. The PSP position is clear. We recognize the need to stay open as an economy. We are pro-trade, but not free for all trade. We recognize the need for real foreign talent to complement our Singaporean core, transferring skills as well as sharing experiences. But we want a healthy balance of foreign and local workforce, achieved through sound immigration and employment policies. We want these policies to be designed and executed fairly, with Singaporean interest first. We call for urgent and concrete steps to be taken to alleviate the current problems. And we have given suggestions what needs to be done. The Prime Minister has said in his National Day message that he recognizes the anxieties about jobs, that his government will make changes over time. But time is of essence. The changes must start now, before this dire situation gets to a point of no return. Many of us have heard or read about the story of Mr. Philip Wang, whom I happen to know. He was a senior vice president of a bank, but now has to drive Grab for a living. Please don't be mistaken. There's nothing wrong with driving a Grab, as it is an honorable job. But this is a good illustration of underemployment, which many of our PMETs are facing. Their skill sets could have been much better. Their skill sets could have been much better utilized. Yet, they are forced into a no-win situation. There are many more sad stories as we discover through our survey of 750 PMET respondents. It pains us to know that we have our own talents that are not treasured, and the very government that's supposed to look after their interest has their priority elsewhere, maybe economic growth. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me close by reminding that democracy is famously described as government of the people, by the people, for the people. So let's not forget that it is the interest of the people that the members of this House and this government are elected to serve. There's nothing wrong in voicing out for them and championing for them. Singaporeans deserve better. The many Philip Wang out there deserve better. For country, for people. Sir, I beg to move the motion. Thank you.
Dr. Amy Khor.
Mr. Speaker and members of this House, let me apologize. I did not mean to take up any more time than is necessary, but I think I need to address or clarify Mr. Liu's point. He asked me what I have got to say about the quote from my speech. Let me say that I would say the same thing, because for the last 8 hours or so, this is exactly what many of the members of this House, including Professor Hoon, has said, and Minister Lawrence Wong, that Singapore has to continue to remain open and have to welcome some of these foreign talent if we want to continue to thrive and grow. We need some of these people. And I think Minister Lawrence has said we simply don't have enough people. So I would still say the same thing, that we have to be very careful in saying that we keep the foreigners out. We don't have any of these people there, and we will have jobs, because indeed, if we do that, we will really hurt the very people that we are trying to help, and that is the Singaporeans that we care about, and we want to make sure that we improve their lives, they have good jobs.
Any other clarifications? Mr. Leong?
Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank SMS Amy Khor for making that statement. So we can confirm that from the debate today, the government's stance is that the old policies still stand. PSP says you need new policies. Thank you.
Mr. Shan.
Thank you, sir. I don't think this is going to be a reprise. Mr. Leong
I have a
asked.
feeling it will be, but it's okay.
Mr. Leong asked me a question, or suggested something, so I thought I should clarify through.
Please do.
Yourself, Mr. Speaker, sir. He said that, look, prior to my post of 21st of June 2021, I have not mentioned seeker, and I asked the Minister Shanmugam, and he didn't say anything. I'm not quite sure what the purport of the point Mr. Leong makes, because Minister Ong Ye Kung had said during the July debate, gave chapter and verse of the various times when PSP party leaders had referred to seeker. For example, Dr. Tan Cheng Bock on the 2nd of July 2020, that PSP will call for a review of the India-Singapore Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement and the canard that it allows the free movement of professionals. And others had made some statements, similar statements. Mr. Leong put up his Facebook along similar lines in June. His motion, which we debated today, is along the same lines. And all of this is on the record, and I had made it clear. So I'm not quite sure what point he was making. I'm not asking him to clarify, because I think then it's past midnight. But all I'm saying is, the reason I didn't respond to him was because the record is clear. He associated himself with all these statements. Unless now he is saying, well, those are racist, but I didn't make them. But he associated himself with them. I think we can leave it at that. That's my answer. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Lawrence Wong.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to respond very quickly to Mr. Leong's last comment, that he concluded the government's old policies remain, and that was his conclusion. That's an erroneous conclusion. My motion specifically states that the government will continue to update and improve our policies. Our policies are not static, they continue to be improved. What we object to are muddle-headed policies that will lead us to the path of ruin. And what Mr. Leong suggested, what the PSP suggested, in our opinion, will get us there. I was flummoxed when Mr. Leong said, if we do not change course, Singapore will remain a low-value add economy. Really? Low-value add economy today? Mr. Leong, have you seen the economic data, today's economy? I think if we change course to adopt your policies, we will truly be a low-value add economy.
Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to clarify a point made by Minister Lawrence Wong vis-à-vis his request that we vote against the PSP motion. We feel strongly about the amendments that we sought to put on the PSP motion. Speaker disallowed it because it was substantive. It was deemed to be a substantive change in the motion. But the reason why we opined that that change was important is because we have a different view on FTAs and SICA compared to the PSP. Similarly, I have shared with the House why I sought to move an amendment to the Minister's motion, and we feel strongly about those amendments as well, and I think we have a difference of opinion on that. And on both motions, the WP will vote accordingly.
Mr. Desmond Chu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do have to apologize to everybody for holding things up, but Mr. Leong Mun Wai had a specific comment, and he says that the NTUC or the labor movement should do some soul searching. I did some soul searching, and I hope he did as well. I'm sure he also benefited from what NTUC has provided over the years through our grocery program. I'm sure he did. But I do want to seek some clarification from him. As he was in the 1980s building a derivative platform in Tokyo, was he aware that in the 1985 recession, NTUC and the union, together with government, worked with the workers to take a 15% cut in CPF to help Singapore go through a difficult time? Whether he also remembered the Asian financial crisis. The labor movement worked with the government and the people of Singapore to go through a difficult period of time. And during the 2008 global financial crisis, under the leadership of then SecGen, Mr. Lim Swee Say, to upturn the downturn. So I don't think NTUC is the weak link in tripartism. And I want to also emphasize, we always do deep reflection and soul searching about what is the best thing that we can do for workers. The best thing that we need to do for workers is to care for them in the long term. We seek to protect workers, we care for their jobs, but protecting workers does not mean a zero-sum game. We are worried if investments go away, companies suffer. If companies suffer, then there will be no jobs for workers. So this is something that we think about day and night. This is the soul searching that I do. I have it here on my phone because this is something that I look at all the time. So I want to seek the clarification of Mr. Leong Mun Wai. After the 3 pointers that I've given to him, does he still agree the NTUC is the weak link? And if he still agrees that NTUC is a weak link, I would very much like to invite him to NTUC and share with him the work that we have done since our founding in 1961. Thank you very much.
Mr. Leong.
Thank you, Member Desmond Chu, for the clarification. I appreciate all the work that NTUC has done for Singaporeans. In fact, NTUC was formed, no, not formed. I think the fair price was formed around the time of the oil shock, right? Oil crisis. I was still a small boy. I remember going to the community center to collect rice from NTUC Fair Price. I don't think it's called Fair Price at that time. Huh? So yeah, the thing done by NTUC, we all Singaporeans, we all know. In fact, in this house, we are all for Singapore. We all know. We are just trying to say what is the right direction forward. So, but when it comes to talking about, well, general welfare for workers, all that, I think NTUC have done a tremendous job as well. But when we come to wage policy, I think there's some room for improvement. And sometimes it's not because of NTUC. There's an overall national policy called foreign talent policy. And then there is some preference to make sure the businesses do well before the workers. Okay, I mean, that may lead to another debate. But I just say, maybe suffice to say that, okay, we think that there's some room for improvement as far as wage policy is concerned. I hope that answers the question, and yeah, thank you.
Members will be glad to know I've prepared for breakfast. Mr. Desmond Chu. I didn't mean that seriously, though.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just one last point, just to clarify what Mr. Leong Mun Wai has said. He said that we ought to do better. Of course, we definitely want to do better for workers, and that perhaps in the wages side of the house, we can do better. I think it's something that we always strive to do our best. We don't want to overstate the work that we've done for the progressive wage model, but it's precisely a way that we can implement good wages for workers by making sure that it's sustainable. So to say that NTUC and labour movement is not doing its part on wage policies, I'm sure we are as confused as he is in the last 8 hours of not doing homework. I think that's important. I think the second thing that we must note is that the NTUC and labour movement has been an important part of the National Wage Council. Year after year, we deliberate, trying to find out what is the best wage policies for our workers across different segments. It's a difficult thing to do. We have fierce exchanges with our employers, with our government side of the house, but we need to do that because we need wage increases to be sustainable, create a pie, so that our workers can go back and come back to work tomorrow again with the job intact. So I do appreciate what Mr. Leong has done in the financial sector, but I do not want what he has said today to stand as a record for the generations of unionists before me who have dedicated their time, their blood, their sweat to better the lot of workers in Singapore. Thank you.
Dr. Tanya Swam.
Okay, I want to thank PSP for sharing your survey on 700 people and sharing some of the ground sentiments, because in healthcare, we actually have problems finding nurses, clinic assistants, and radiographers for these trained jobs. So I'm just wondering, could there be a mismatch of trained Singaporeans in getting these jobs? And I hear a lot about a lot of concern over foreigners and foreign talent. I would like to ask the PSP, what do you think of Singaporeans working overseas? In a global economy, I would think that there will always be flow of people crossing nations for jobs. And would our Singaporeans working overseas then be discriminated as foreigners?
Mr. Leong.
Thank you, Dr. Tan, for the clarification. One on the lack of manpower in certain sectors. As we say, we are not saying that we clamp down, on foreigners immediately. We are saying that we have to chart a path, because this path going down does it mean that we need more and more foreigners? That cannot be the case, right? Because that is not something that Singaporeans want. So we may need to chart a new path now. But as for at the ground levels, there are a lot of different requirements, so we will handle it accordingly. Okay.
Mr. Abdul Samad.
How about sorry.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I think, I'm not so sure what's the right word to use. When you say about NTUC not doing justice, I take it very bad, because I'm a working union leader. My job is not full-time doing union, but it's a mixture of sacrifice that I have to take. When you talk about wages can be better, I would like to share with this House what you have seen and you heard based on just the PWM is not reflective. Every union, through the branches that they represent, every time when we renew a collective agreement, we make sure the workers are benchmarked to the type of work that they really do. Review their job scope, pay them accordingly. As much as we know, recently when NTUC launched the Worker 4.0, we talk about 3 Ws. Wages, welfare, and work prospect. Wages is always inside our mind. So it is not right to say that NTUC have not done our part. We have been doing since it was founded. I'm a beneficiary of past great union leaders. Some have been NMPs like the late Nityanandan. We go on the table, we quarrel over wages, even we know At the end of the day, it has to be, there's some sacrifices to be made. But I want to put it clear, NTUC, we are here for the workers. The wages, the welfare, the work prospect will continue to be our main aim. We are just not representing. When you talk about fair price, that's talking about trying to mitigate the cost of living compared to other merchants. But we are holistic, an institution that upholds every worker needs to pay with due respect for what they have contributed to the company. Thank you.
Any final clarifications? Ms. Janet Ang.
Well, I'm so sorry it is past midnight. I am 63. No, 62, sorry, are you? Past midnight. But I'm 62, sorry. Don't add my age. Well, Mr. Speaker, if I may, I'm really humbled that Mr. Leong called my name in his speech. So, I cannot help but have to stand up. So the point is, he mentioned about the data that I shared in my speech that came from the survey of American companies, a preview of the survey that the MCHAM shared with me. They are real employers who are hiring, and they have found the gaps they found. So I'm not sure what Mr. Leong is disagreeing with me about. All right, because it's from a survey, they are real employers, they have found those gaps. I can either do a couple of things. One is engage these employers and really, like I said in my speech, understand what those relevant skills that our people are missing, what those relevant experience that is missing, and then we go figure out how to get the right approach. But since, I have managed United Nations employees in IBM before, all right, I will share with you, which is what I said in the speech. One tip that Singaporean workers need to recognize is we have to be brave to speak up. We will always have all our things in our head, I'm so good on all this, that guy is not so good. Why is he taking your job? But if you do not speak up and you do not tell anybody why you deserve that job, you won't get that job. Because the competition, Mr. Leong, which is my second point I was going to ask you, because you did say that the paradigm has shifted from our time. I'm 62, I don't know how old you are, but yes, the paradigm has definitely shifted. So don't you agree that competition for most jobs is not just among the talents that are onshore in Singapore, whether local or foreign, but really a global one? Right, so again, back to my point, if us Singaporean PMETs, we don't speak up, we don't ask for the job, we don't show hunger for our job, then of course, those who speak louder, those who are more enthusiastic, those who appear more hungry will get the job. So my point is, Mr. Leong, you have been a private sector executive yourself. Do you give the job to the individual who is entitled to the job, almost like, and this is not a little bit scary to say it, almost like Malaysia's Bumiputra policy, perhaps? Or do you give the job to the guy who has the skills to do the job, and better still, add the other characteristics of passion for the business, hunger for the business, and a willingness to go the extra mile? So, Mr. Leong, since you asked me those questions, if you could, help me understand whether I got you wrong. Thank you.
Mr. Leong.
Okay, I think, thank you, Member Janet, for raising the clarification, but it's past midnight. Only thing I want to confirm is that, yes, I'm also 62 years old. So that's why I know we are from the same generation, and that's why I related the example. But I don't think we want to go further into explaining what you just said, because it will enter into another debate. I hope to have another opportunity in the near future that we can talk about wage policy and retirement. Okay, but that will be for another forum. So I hope that's okay for you, Ms. Janet. Thank you.
Professor Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A reference was made to the lump of labor fallacy. So I think we all agree that, in essence, that's not a good description of labor markets. And I will just conclude by applying that to two settings. I think one with reference to what Member Desmond Chew illustrated, thinking that the understanding that the lump of labor fallacy, which is that there are only 100 jobs, and so, you know, if you got more people than that, and then some other people take the job, the others would not have it. That, in fact, that does not apply first in a setting when the economy is itself subject to adverse shock, recessions. Desmond Chew pointed very well to the episode in 84, 85. In the face of a sharp recession, in fact, therefore, the number of jobs substantially decreased. Unemployment sharply went up. There were major retrenchment. Job destruction was very high. I think that the remarkable thing about Singapore, when you look at how it faced its challenges over the decades, is the ability indeed to demonstrate the lump of labor fallacy does not apply even in an adverse situation. 84, I was an honors year student graduating from NUS. Prime Minister Lee was then actually directing the academic committee. They came out with their report. And the remarkable thing that came out of that episode, really remarkable because it was the sharpest recession since 1965, was the ability to bring together union leaders, employers, government, to convince the people that you would accept a 15 percentage point cut in your CPF. That amounted to 12% of your wages, really. I had the opportunity in 2010 when Professor Paul Romer, who won the Nobel Prize in 2018 through my association, Professor Edmund Phelps was my teacher at Columbia. Paul had, for some years before he won the Nobel Prize, was very interested to visit various countries to talk about policy. And so he was in Singapore, he was in the International Advisory Panel on university at that time, came to me and said, Hian Teck, at Professor Phelps' suggestion, would you like to take a trip with me to South Africa? One-day conference, where they're going to bring together their business leaders, their trade union leaders, to talk about the fact that the unemployment rate among the young people were close to 50%. And I had a chance to tell them about the Singapore story, about how it was with trade union members all in the room, about how we were able to convince labor to accept the 15 percentage point cut. And of course, with the understanding that the wage, the CPF rate will be restored. The challenge ahead for Singapore is understanding that the lump of labor policy still does not apply over the long term. The challenge for Singapore really is to recognize that the sources of growth going forward has to come with the continued integration into the global economy. And I think Minister Lawrence Wong has demonstrated and illustrated that very well. a view that I share with. And so the challenge for Singapore is in the next stage to indeed demonstrate, and because we have got 5 decades of being able to find a new way to reinvent ourselves, I think there is great reason to have great optimism to show that indeed the lump of labor fallacy will not apply. And at the heart of it, I believe it is indeed right in that point in the motion by Minister Lawrence Wong, for which I have a deep sympathy, that Singapore's growth must continue with the economic openness. And it will include openness to trade, capital, and people in the right way. Thank you very much.